Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Cosacchi. I'm the Vice President for Mission and Ministry here. And this is like my Roman Empire. I'm just going to say a few quick words about what I'm planning on doing here, and then we'll kick it off. So very straightforward. We're just calling it Papal Transition, looking back and ahead. I'm going to talk a little bit about Pope Francis and a little bit about his pontificate, and then we'll talk about the conclave that's upcoming and what we can expect from that, and who some of the contenders might be, how it might play out. Of course, all of that is really a fool's errand. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but when it comes to this stuff, I'm a fool. So when John Paul II died in April of 2005, I was a freshman in college. And, John Paul II had been Pope since 1978. Some of you might have been alive during the year 1978, so you might know that is otherwise termed the year of three popes, because Pope Paul VI died in the summer of 1978, and the cardinals elected, 111 cardinals elected Albino Luciani, who took the name John Paul I after his two immediate predecessors, John the 23rd and Paul VI. And then he lasted for 33 days before dying. So the cardinals had to all come back for a second conclave in 1978, and they elected John Paul II, who was 57 at the time. So a very long pontificate. He reigned until 2005. So at that point in time, I was 18 years old, and I said to my friends, I said, what happens when a pope dies? I have no idea what happens. So I went to the library and took out about 25 books, and this is not, for the students in the room, this is not a recipe for success. I skipped many classes in the spring of 2005 and really became an expert in papal conclaves. At the time, nobody cared what I thought, though. So now for the dozen people in the room for those of you who are here, I'm grateful. So you're feeding my mania right now. Anyway, so I've done a lot of research on what happens in a conclave, who the contenders are, and we'll talk a little bit maybe about 2005 and about 2013 as we get further on here. But first of all, I think it's only right to say a few words about Pope Francis, who, as I put there, reigned from 2013 after the historic resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, the first pope who resigned in 500 or 600 years. And then the cardinals elected Francis in 2013, and he, as you know, just died on Monday of this week, Easter Monday. His pontificate was really historic in so many ways. Let me just mention three ways in which he was a pope of firsts. We've heard a lot about this on the news over the last week, but he was the first pope to take the name Francis. When he was elected, he was also the first Jesuit pope, and he's the first pope from the Americas. But when he was elected, because he was the first Jesuit pope, a lot of people, maybe even some in this room, certainly myself, thought he was taking the name after Francis Xavier, one of the first Jesuits, a great missionary, being a Jesuit himself. That stood to reason. 2 days after he was elected, he said to a group of media that were assembled at the Vatican, the reason he took the name was because right before he got up to accept this office, imagine what an amazing moment that must be, how overwhelming. You've heard your name called out, 2/3 of the cardinals have voted for you, and you're being called forth by the senior-most cardinal in the Sistine Chapel. The cardinal sitting next to him, Cardinal Humes from Brazil, grabbed his arm and said, "Don't forget the poor." And so he's the first person who came to my mind when he said that, because Cardinal Humes himself was a Franciscan, was St. Francis of Assisi. So he says, I took the name for three reasons, because St. Francis of Assisi was the saint of peace, the saint of the poor, and the saint of all of creation. So those themes really radiated throughout his pontificate. As I said, also the first Jesuit pope. The Jesuits are not supposed to seek after higher office in the church. That's why there are relatively few Jesuit bishops, few Jesuit cardinals, although in the conclave of 2013, he was the only Jesuit in the room. This time around, there's going to be 4 Jesuits in the room. He appointed a number of Jesuits as cardinals, but 4 of them remain under the age of 80. Unlikely that any of them will be elected, but we'll get to that later. And then the first pope from the Americas, which, as he said when he was on the balcony, when he was first introduced, the cardinals went to the end of the world to find a successor to Pope Benedict XVI. So we'll see what they do again in a couple weeks' time, but certainly whoever the pope is, whether he's Italian or from the Americas or from Asia or from Africa, or from elsewhere in Europe or anywhere else in the world, he will have to be a man with a reality and understanding of the global reality that the church is in and that the world is in. So Pope Francis was a most amazing person. Just I'm including a few images here. On the upper left, you see the first moment that we met him as the Pope in March of 2013, when this moment was, for me, actually all 6 of these moments are for me some of the most moving. This is when, you might remember, he said, "Before I bless you, the people in the square and the people throughout the world, I want you to pray for me." Well, speaking about firsts, that was a first. That was a nice change of pace. I had never heard a pope come out and say those words as the first words out of his mouth. Of course, we came to know very early on that he was, because he was elected during the season of Lent, so Easter was only a few weeks after his election in March of 2013, and the first thing he does is wash the feet of prisoners, which you see in the top middle. That had been his practice when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, going to prisons every year and washing the feet of prisoners. Even last Thursday, Holy Thursday, 8 days ago, he went to a prison to visit these prisoners 4 days before he died. He was always wanting to be with the people on the margins of society. So you see the picture on the upper right of Mr. Vinci, who just died last year, this man with a very disfigured face. This was a moment that encapsulates the way that Pope Francis reached out to people that the world isn't interested in looking at, is more interested in shunning and putting to the margins. Pope Francis, as with the prisoners, was trying to draw them in closer and closer to himself. My favorite moment from his pontificate was on the lower left. This was March 27th of 2020, during the lockdown phase of COVID, when Pope Francis, as you might recall, called for an extraordinary Urbi et Orbi. Urbi et Orbi means a blessing to the city, Urbi, and the city of Rome, and Orbi, the world, which Pope Francis just did, the lower right, for the last time on Easter Sunday from the balcony, the same loggia where he stood when he was first introduced to us. That happens every year on Easter and Christmas, and any time a new pope is elected. But for the first time that anybody could remember, he called for an extraordinary Urbi et Orbi, and you see the square was empty, as squares throughout the world were during that time. That was just a most moving moment for me to watch that. And then in the bottom center, he is making his historic address to a joint session of Congress in the fall of 2015. These are just 6 snapshots. There's any number more that we could talk about, and I'd be more than happy to talk at the end about any of those if you're interested. But it's also a papacy of documents. Pope Francis wrote a lot, maybe not as much as John Paul II, but his pontificate was less than half the length of John Paul II's. I found his writing to be very good. A lot of these documents tended to be pretty long, however. So my thought is that they might not have gotten the reading that they deserve. However, some of these were instant classics. So Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home. As you know, we've become a Laudato Si University. That was remarkable because Pope Francis wrote more on care for our common home, on the environment, on ecological ethics in that one document than all of his predecessors put together. And not just more, but like 50, 100 times more than all of his predecessors put together. Benedict XVI got the nickname the Green Pope. Well, Pope Francis was the dark green pope. He really went deeper into these topics. Then he picked it up in Fratelli Tutti on fraternity and social friendship, where he talked about a number of social ills like war and the death penalty and racism and xenophobia. Those were all themes that he continued to come back to in his pontificate. Evangelii Gaudium, if you really want to find like the blueprint for Pope Francis's pontificate, take a look at that document, because there he sort of lays out everything that he wanted to accomplish. Whether or not he got through all of those things, that's a question that we're really going to be studying for many years to come, but that was his blueprint. The last two here are sort of, well, Amoris Laetitia was a pretty famous one, and maybe infamous in some quarters. Why? Because of a single footnote. Maybe some of you remember this. There was a footnote in there where maybe some of you know that the teaching of the church for many centuries is that people who are divorced and civilly remarried are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. And Pope Francis, with a single footnote in there, had sort of underscored a teaching that he put forth time and time again, namely that the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect, but medicine for all, medicine for sinners, medicine for the weak. And that in some cases, people who were divorced and remarried could receive the Eucharist. Remarkable, remarkable document. And if you don't think that was remarkable, just pay attention to people in some quarters of the church who reacted so harshly to that one footnote. And then this is kind of inside baseball, but Pope Francis was elected to reform the Curia of the Catholic Church. That was one of the mandates he was given by the cardinals in 2013. So just 3 years ago, he released a document called Predicate Evangelium, which did in fact reform the Curia. So that was sort of his mandate coming to fruition. Okay, tomorrow, as you know, we'll have the papal funeral, and the picture I have there is from the last time that we had a papal funeral. This was in April 8th of 2005 at the funeral of Pope John Paul II. And it's kind of a blurry picture, but most of the cardinals in this shot are dead now, currently deceased. Although this man right here is a Polish cardinal, now a cardinal named Konrad Krajewski, who Pope Francis has sent off on missions throughout the world, especially to Ukraine. He is what's called the papal almoner, so he tends to the poor. So everybody in the Roman Curia, with the exception of 3 people, lose their jobs when the Pope dies or resigns. And he's one of them who keeps his job. Why? Because the church always needs to tend the poor. So he's in charge of that. Also the apostolic penitentiary. Why? Because the church always needs to forgive sins, even when there's not a pope. And then the Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who we've seen a little bit of on the news, he was the one who made the announcement about the pope's death. But the funeral tomorrow morning, which will start at 4 a.m. our time, for any of you who were at the Mass earlier, Father Marina said that I would be somebody who would be setting my alarm, and I just can't imagine anybody would even be going to sleep tonight. It's like Christmas Eve. Anyway, no, I'm kidding, but I will be up to watch it. But in any case, it is a beautiful, beautiful liturgy, and I would, if you get up at even if you slept in until 5:30 or 5:45, you would still catch the final commendation, which will be done by all the Eastern Rite Catholic patriarchs, where they gather around the coffin of Pope Francis and will proceed to have this beautiful Byzantine chant for about 10 minutes. It is really, really stunning liturgical rite. So anyway, I would recommend this to all of you. Already what's been going on these last days are general congregations in Paul VI Hall. This is a picture from just yesterday. So the hall is not full now. There were about 116 cardinals there yesterday. There were exactly 116 cardinals there yesterday. And within a couple days, this room is going to be full. I'll show some numbers later. There are 252 cardinals in the world right now. Not all of them will make it to Rome, but all of them are invited to go. And these general congregations, the days of mourning will begin after the funeral tomorrow. There'll be 9 of those. But the general congregations, especially that will take place next week, are remarkably, remarkably important. This is where the Pope is basically going to be made. Because every cardinal, the ones under 80 who are allowed to vote and the ones over 80 who are not allowed to vote, will have a chance to speak to the rest of the College of Cardinals. It's behind closed doors, so we're not going to know who says what, although there are a lot of Italian cardinals who traditionally have very loose lips. So they will give some serious hints as to what has been said to the Vaticanisti, the Vatican reporters on that beat. So check the news every day next week after 3 p.m. and you're going to see a lot of themes that come up from these meetings. Every cardinal will have a chance to speak. this man here, thinking about the funeral tomorrow, that is Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, who will preside and preach at the funeral tomorrow morning. He's 91 years old. He's the Dean of the College of Cardinals, which is why he's in that role at the funeral. And I think that's a great idea. I'll say something else about that in a little bit. What is a conclave? This is a picture from the 2013 conclave, and now even looking at this picture, I see many people who have died, and many more who are now over 80. From the 2013 conclave, there are fewer than 30 remaining. There's like 26 remaining from the 2013 conclave who will be voting at this next conclave, and just 5 from the 2005 conclave who are going in for a third try. This is, again, for those of you interested in any sort of beautiful rites, on the first day of the conclave, we don't know when that's going to be yet. On the first day of the conclave, they're going to show all the cardinals processing in and taking their oath of secrecy, which is what they're doing now. They're approaching the book of the Gospels, and they place their hand on the book of the Gospels and say that they promise to keep secret what happens in the conclave. It's another promise that many of them break. But if anybody's caught breaking that promise, they're automatically excommunicated from the church. That's the penalty for it. In any case, I guarantee you some cardinals will break that. Within 6 months, we're going to have a book out. I'm not going to have a book out on this, but somebody's going to have a book out about this conclave, I promise you. So some papal elections throughout history. So I have many of those books that I mentioned. I went and got from the library. I now own, and this is where those books are where I got some of this information from. So I don't cite it here, but if you're interested in the books, I can surely show you at the end. In the first millennium, the Pope was elected by a variety of methods and persons. The most famous of those methods was in the year 262 when Pope Fabian was elected. He was not even a candidate for Pope, and a white dove landed on his head, and the people just acclaimed him Pope by acclamation. He became Pope immediately. So that was one method. But oftentimes, emperors and kings would have a big say in who was Pope. By the turn of the second millennium there, by 1059, the College of Cardinals is given the principal right of electing Pope, but they were not especially good at it for the first couple hundred years of having this right. By 1179, 2/3 majority is set, and that's still the case today. So we have 134 cardinals as of the last 2 hours. Every now and then a cardinal has been pulling out. So there's 135 people eligible. Right now we're at 134. One person is too sick to go to Rome. So 2/3 of that is 90. So we'll get into more of those numbers in a minute. The smallest conclave is 12. The largest one will be this next one, 134, give or take. The largest one up until now has been 2005 and 2013, both had 115 cardinals. In the 16th century, the maximum number was set at 70, and then in 1996, John Paul II raised it to 120, but that's just a suggestion because, as you know, as I've said 3 times now, we're going to have 134 or thereabouts at this next conclave. So that's the numbers we're going with. In 1970, Pope Paul VI changed the rule so that cardinals over the age of 80 would not be allowed to participate. In 1978, when the first of those conclaves happened, there were only 11 cardinals over the age of 80. And they were pissed. They were really not happy. They were trying to get into that conclave. Just as there's one cardinal now who is not eligible for the conclave. He's under 80, but he was found guilty of embezzlement in a Vatican court, Cardinal Giovanni Becciu. And he went to the press on Monday night. Francis hadn't even been put in his coffin yet. And Cardinal Becciu says, "Oh, I'm absolutely participating in the conclave." So if you don't think there's going to be drama here, I promise you, it's going to be better than the movie. Trust me. The reason why it's called conclave, this last one is fascinating. Between 1268 and 1271, the cardinals were meeting in Viterbo, just outside of Rome. And you notice that it was almost 3 years. It was 2 years and 9 months that conclave went. It wasn't a conclave yet, it was an election still. And they could not come to a conclusion till finally the King of France intervened and they were forced to. But after that happened, in 1274, Pope Gregory X established what we now know as the conclave, cum clave, with a key, so they're locked in a place. It hasn't always been the Sistine Chapel, but for the last couple hundred years, it is the Sistine Chapel. That's where the next conclave will take place. and as you see there, since 1800. The ballots have been burned since 1417, but there's no record of white smoke since the beginning of the 20th century. Now, as we know, the white smoke indicates a new pope. Black smoke indicates that they have been unsuccessful. Any baptized male is eligible, but it's always been a cardinal since 1378. So that's the last time it was a non-cardinal. And the last pope elected who was not a bishop was Gregory the 16th in 1831. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome, so if they elect a non-bishop, they need to ordain him before he can take office. In point of fact, at this next conclave, I don't think I have it. Let me go back, because I can show you the back of his head here. This is Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe, and I'm writing a biography on him right now, he is not a bishop. He's a priest. So in the unlikely event, although for book sales, I'm hoping he's elected. Full disclosure, I don't want to play favorites or anything like that, but I have to be upfront with you. I hope that man is elected. In the unlikely event that happens, they'll have to ordain him a bishop in the Sistine Chapel before he comes out. So if you see white smoke and we're getting to like 2 hours before we see the candidate emerge, I'll be getting excited, everyone. Okay, let's see. Okay, and there's been young popes under 25 and 3 over the age of 80, not since 1406 though. I actually think this time around a few people over the age of 80 might get a couple votes. I don't expect them to be the victorious candidates. But keep in mind that in 2013, Francis was 76 when he was elected, and in 2005, Benedict XVI was 78 when he was elected. So I do think that 75 to 80 is sort of the sweet spot for ages. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you some papabile, some people who might be elected. None of them are in that sweet spot, though, which is why I said at the beginning it's a fool's errand. You can see the recent conclaves from the last century or so. Nothing has gone longer than 5 days in 1922 when they elected Pope Pius XI. The last 2 conclaves were kind of historically short, especially Benedict XVI, just 4 votes, which was the same as the first conclave of 1978, but not as quick as Pope Pius XII in 1939. Incidentally, about that, I'm going to show you in a moment. Maybe I can, I'll go back. Pius XII, when he was elected, he was the only one who ever served as Secretary of State who was elected Pope. One of the major papabile in this election is Pietro Parolin, who's currently the Secretary of State. I don't necessarily think he's going to get elected, and that was stupid to say on camera, because he's probably going to be the one. You can replay that, and I'm going to look like an idiot. But in any case, you see there some of the breakdown. But I'll tell you why in a few minutes why I don't think he's the top candidate. There's the breakdown of cardinals. Pope Francis has appointed 108 of the 134 electors, which is just over 80%, or just around 80%. So we need 90 votes for an election, and you see the numbers there from recent conclaves. 115 was the previous high, so this one is going to sort of knock that out of the water. Here's the breakdown by continent of the electors. This number for Europe is sort of historically low, 39%. It was 54% in 2013, and even that was low. Historically speaking. So you see a lot more cardinals now from Africa and Asia. Those numbers were both below 10% in 2013. The other numbers have stayed pretty much consistent from previous conclaves. But there are 72 countries going to be represented in this conclave, which is just remarkable. There are countries that, in point of fact, many people didn't even know there was a local church in some of these countries, but until Pope Francis appointed cardinals from those areas. So those will all be interesting things to watch. Okay, I've got 10 people here, and I don't necessarily think any of these 10 are going to get elected. This is how we're going to bring this to a close here, and I'm more than happy to have conversation about any of this. Papabile, so the plural would be papabili, so each one of these is papabile, singular. That just means pope able to be elected pope, somebody that they think is a good contender. And when I say they, I'm talking about the media, basically. And some of these you haven't heard many of. This is in no particular order, so this is just my list. Some of them will be familiar to you, others of them won't be. Cardinal Lacroix is from Quebec. He is a very affable man, likable, and part of this, because it's a political election, has to do with how the cardinal electors feel that they're going to get along with the person that they vote for. So he has served as a capable administrator in Canada, and I think that he's going to have some people voting for him. This is one that you've heard a lot about, Chito Tagle, Luis Antonio Tagle. He's from the Philippines. He is an amazing preacher, a very pastoral person, also very emotional. If you've ever seen him, you probably saw him cry if you've ever seen him speak. Gets very emotional. There are two knocks against him, I think, and one of them is his age. He's 67, which for this conclave is very young, because if he lived until he was 90, right, that would be a 23-year pontificate. I don't think a lot of the cardinals in this conclave are that enthusiastic about another pontificate that goes over 2 decades. One of the reasons why Benedict and Francis were elected in their late 70s was because the cardinals were not interested in another 27-year pontificate like John Paul II's. My 2 cents. The other knock against Cardinal Tagle is that after being the president of Caritas International for a number of years, he was basically fired from that job by Pope Francis, really because he's not the world's greatest administrator. And this is probably terrible, but a lot of the cardinals are going into this election thinking that what they need to do is vote for Jesus with an MBA. And Cardinal Tagle is not known for his good managerial experience. So we'll see. He might get elected, but that would be the thing he has to work against. Here's one you might not have heard of, Cardinal Chidley Langlois. He's a cardinal from Haiti, another very affable man, very pastoral, with good managerial experience, coming from a country that has gone through a lot of hard times. So Pope Francis appointed him to the College of Cardinals because he was from Haiti, because he was close to the poor. So something to think about. I think some cardinals will give him a look. This is one you might have heard of, Cardinal Zuppi, the Archbishop of Bologna. This is a fascinating cardinal, because I believe that if he's elected, if the conclave goes to like day 4 or 5, this could be the guy, because he is very progressive on social questions. So he's accepting of LGBT people, LGBTQ plus people, and accepting of divorced and remarried people. But at the same time, and this is something you can say of almost no one, he's also actually a fan of the traditional Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass. So to put those two things together, very uncommon, but you might find people with a more liberal ideological leaning supporting him, and some people with a more conservative ideological leaning, especially liturgically, supporting him. So he could be a good compromise candidate if it gets late in the game. Now, this has been the odds maker's favorite. Cardinal Parolin, who I mentioned before, is the Secretary of State. He has really he's been Francis's right-hand man for almost his entire pontificate. The knock against him is that he's only been a diplomat. He has very little pastoral experience. So whether the cardinals are interested in that or not, that's an open question. He's a very good diplomat, but that's his only sort of professional experience. If the cardinals are looking to sort of have a reactionary response to Francis's pontificate with something a little bit different, they're probably going to go in the direction of Cardinal Peter Erdo, the Archbishop of Budapest in Hungary. Cardinal Erdo is much more conservative than many of the names that I just mentioned. By the way, a disclaimer about these terms, liberal and conservative, they don't map out the way it does for our own political partisan politics in this country. So when we say liberal, we think of Bernie Sanders, or conservative, we think of Ted Cruz or something like that. Different here, because those terms don't fit neatly. However, for lack of better terms, we have to use something, and that's the best we've got. Personally, I don't think that the numbers will add up for Erdo. If you were to sort of break it down into ideological camps, the cardinals in this conclave, and again, using those imperfect terms, you have about 65 who are quote unquote liberal, 48 who are conservative, and 21 who are either moderate or ambiguous. In other words, I can't find a really helpful statement or homily that they've given one way or another. So even if all the moderate/ambiguous cardinals voted with the conservative bloc, they're well short of the 90 votes needed. Even if they all voted with the liberal bloc, they're still 5 votes short of the 90 they need. So but that having been said, I don't think Erdo is going to muster up 90 votes. Peter Turkson might. He is originally from Ghana, and for the last 15 years or so has worked in the Curia of the Vatican. If the cardinals are looking to go to the African continent, and the vast majority of African cardinals in this conclave, in fact, all but Turkson pretty much, would be sort of counted under that quote-unquote conservative category. Turkson would not. So this would be extending the papacy to a continent that hasn't seen a pope in over 1,000 years, and it would be somebody who is very much in the mold of Francis. So that's an interesting both and. Robert Prevost. The next two I'm going to show you are American, from the United States. Prevost was born in Chicago, but he spent very little time in the United States. Since becoming a priest, he spent most of his priesthood in South and Central America. He was a bishop in Peru for a number of years. Now, well, not at this moment, because his job is one of those that lapsed when the Pope died, but he is the prefect of the dicastery for bishops. Sounds like a boring job. It's actually fascinating. This guy is the one who catalogs all the candidates for bishops and vets them throughout the entire world. So he has a standing meeting with the Pope every Saturday morning. So if a bishop is appointed in your diocese, you can be sure that his name crossed Cardinal Prevost's desk. Interesting candidate. I think he's going to have a lot of support, actually. Another American who I think is going to get some support is Cardinal Joseph Tobin, the Archbishop of Newark. The reason why, and Tobin would be somebody who would, he's probably, of all the people I've put on this list, the most liberal, and yet, again, using those terms that aren't perfect, right? I want to be clear when I'm talking to the camera here. Those are not perfect terms. But Tobin is really a well-liked person among a lot of people of a variety of ideological stripes. And he's well known in Rome. He spent a number of years there. He's a Redemptorist, so he spent a number of years there as the master of the Redemptorist order. I think he will get some people looking at him. I don't expect, by the way, that an American will win, but if one does, it's likely that it's going to be one of those two. And the last one I think I have is Cardinal Tempesta, the Archbishop of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Cardinal Tempesta is very much in the likeness of Pope Francis. He's, they call him the worker bishop, as a matter of fact. He sort of spends a lot of time with the poor, spends a lot of time with those who are workers themselves, is very, very interested in those who are doing hard labor. So I think he would be another one that will get something of a look. At the end of the conclave, as you know, there'll be white smoke when 2/3 of the ballots come in for the successful candidate. When that happens, they call the man forward and they say, "Do you accept this election?" And he says, "I do." And at that very second, literally instantly, he becomes the Pope. Then they'll ask him by what name he decides to be known, and that name. So we'll hear that name immediately on the balcony when the proto-deacon comes out. The proto-deacon is the senior cardinal deacon. They're all cardinals, but they're broken up into orders in the College of Cardinals. So we know that if Dominique Mamberti does not come out onto the loggia, he's the Pope. That'll be his thing. Anyway, I'll have his picture memorized in my brain before that happens. But he'll announce the Pope's name and then announce the name that he has decided to reign under, and that will tell us a lot about him. As I mentioned before, what Francis's name has meant for his pontificate, but these names will often say something about it. I don't expect this for, the conclave will start between May 5th and May 10th, and then, you know, anytime after that we could get a successful candidate. I think that's it. Anyway, happy to take any questions or conversations. Patty, what do you got?
Can you give us a rundown of the other ages of the other candidates? Because you only said the one who you said he was 67, so kind of on the younger side.
I'll see what I can do here.
It's
Tempesta 73, Tobin 72, Prevost is 69, Tristan 74, Erdo 72, Parolin 70, Zuppi is 69, Langlois, I don't know. Tagle is 67, and Lacroix, early 70s. Yeah, Andrea.
You mentioned that they're unable to speak of what happens while they're under lock and key.
Mm-hmm.
Are they able to say, you know how you said in the beginning they'll come out and they'll each speak about themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Can they share that?
So they will. So here, I'll give you a little story of what happened in 2013. So Andrea is asking about the general congregations here. And in 2013, so again, it's supposed to be kept secret. They don't take oaths like they will at the conclave, but it's supposed to remain secret. And in 2013, at the end of these days, all the U.S. cardinals stay. They have rooms at the North American College in Rome, and so that's where they stay. That's while they're there before the conclave begins. They stay at the North American College, and every night the U.S. cardinals would have a press conference. The first 3 nights they had a press conference in 2013 after these general congregations, and there was a lot of good information being gathered at that press conference. And then on the 4th day, the Secretary of the Vatican Press Corps said no more. But as I said, there were some Italian cardinals that had a lot of loose lips, and that has remained the same. There are fewer Italian cardinals now, but there'll be cardinals from all over the world who will have their favorite Vatican reporter, and they'll go out for dinner and tell them exactly what happened, exactly who said it, and that'll hit the news for us in the afternoon on each of these days, probably next week and maybe into the week after, depending on how long they decide to go. So, yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
For electing the Pope, does it just consist of a group of cardinals meeting in secrecy, having a list of cardinals, then 2/3 of those cardinals choosing that one person to become the Pope?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And the thing is that I should have said that when they're in the conclave here, so this is obviously before, let me see if this works here. See the guy right here? That was at that time in 2013, the Papal Master of Ceremonies. He's the guy, so it's a different guy now. Now it's Archbishop Diego Ravelli. Then it was Guido Marini at that time. And after everybody takes their oath of secrecy, Archbishop Ravelli will walk to the door of the Sistine Chapel. Everybody else is going to leave ahead of him, and he will say extra omnes, which means everyone else out. And he'll lock the door behind it, and then he himself will leave. But in any case, during this conclave, Ben, when they're in the room here, the only words that are spoken, each cardinal will process, they'll take that table out of the way with the Book of the Gospels. Each cardinal will process up to the altar in the Sistine Chapel. There will be 3 cardinals sitting behind the altar called scrutineers. Those cardinals will take the votes. The cardinal will approach the altar, and in front of, I should have given you a picture of Michelangelo's Last Judgment there. They'll stand before the Last Judgment, hold up their voting card, their ballot, and say, before God, I confirm that the man that I am voting for is best suited to be Pope. And they'll, right in front of the Last Judgment, so talk about overwhelming, they'll put the ballot in the receptacle, which will then be moved into another receptacle, and then once everybody's voted, the scrutineers will tally the votes. They'll call out the cardinal's name, or the person's name who gets the vote, and then each of these cardinals, you see at their desk here, they have a little, this is a ritual of, this little book is a ritual of what happens during the conclave. The book next to it is a document called Universi Dominici Gregis, which was the one written in 1996 by John Paul II, which governs the whole proceeding. So if they have any question at any time, they can look it up in that document. But they also have a notebook. You see some of the notebooks at the places where they'll keep their own tallies of who gets votes. And after each ballot, they're supposed to burn their notes with the ballots. So the black smoke that you see or the white smoke that you see is the result of all of the paperwork being burned. But there's no debate or dissension here, Ben. All of that happens in the general congregations before, and then also sort of like in the cafeteria and the sitting rooms of Casa Sancta Marta, where all of the cardinals will stay once the conclave begins. Incidentally, that's where Pope Francis lived the last 12 years. So,
And the voting
Yeah.
too isn't like the hope with the most amount of votes wins. Just
nope, you have to hit 2/3.
2/3.
You have to clear that hurdle.
And it has to be 2/3 first. Let's say one cardinal gets 2/3 before another cardinal. That cardinal wins.
As soon as anybody hits 2/3, it's over. And then, unless he declines the papacy, he could say, I don't accept, and then they'll have to go back to the drawing board. But by the time they hit 2/3, they know that there's a groundswell of support. So, like, the perfect example of this was in 2005. When the conclave began, there were really two candidates. And again, to go back to these terrible terms, conservative and liberal, the conservative option was Joseph Ratzinger, who ended up being the successful candidate, reigning under Benedict XVI. And the liberal candidate was Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, who was a Jesuit Archbishop of Milan for many years. Cardinal Martini showed up to that funeral in 2005 in the conclave using a cane, and had reported to his confreres there that he was suffering with Parkinson's. Well, John Paul II had just died after suffering with Parkinson's for about a decade, and after a couple of ballots, Cardinal Martini said, please, nobody else vote for me. Shift your votes to somebody else. So in fact, the runner-up in 2005 was Cardinal Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis in 2013. There's a couple fascinating differences here. This is not the question you asked, Ben, but I'm going to go for it anyway. In 2005, the runner-up was Bergoglio. And in 2013, the winner was Bergoglio. In 2013, the runner-up was Angelo Scola, who was then the Archbishop of Milan. He's now over 80, so he's probably not a viable candidate. So that's one area where this conclave is going to differ a lot from 2013. Namely, the reigning runner-up is not eligible. He's eligible, but he's not in the room. Another way that this is different from 2005, which is the last time we saw a papal funeral, is that in 2005, the dean of the College of Cardinals was Joseph Ratzinger. So before the funeral, he was not on anybody's list. If you don't believe me, you can go back and look at back issues of America Magazine, The Tablet, Commonweal, National Catholic Reporter. His name is not there. And then he gives the homily at the most watched religious event in the history of the world, and within 15 minutes, he becomes the prohibited favorite. I think it's a great thing. And I'm not saying that was a stump speech, because it wasn't. You'd have to be out of your mind to want this job, and I don't think he did. But he became the favorite instantly after that homily. So I think it's a great thing that the dean of the College of Cardinals is over the age of 80 and not an elector. Cardinal Ray, who is the dean and will give the funeral tomorrow morning, will not be in any way, shape, or form a stump speech for him. He's not going to be elected at the age of 91. Meg, please. Oh, we'll have plenty. Yeah, go ahead, Meg.
I am on sound, everyone. But if you could go back, I did not know the Pope. Like, if you could explain more about the Pope being the Bishop of Rome and
Yep.
how they would need to be ordained. Like, I guess I thought you had to be a cardinal in order to be Pope, but you say no.
Phenomenal questions. I'm so glad you asked. So, canon law actually says that cardinals have to be bishops. So, why, you ask, is Cardinal Radcliffe not a bishop? What, am I going the wrong direction? Whoops. So Cardinal Radcliffe petitioned the Pope. Oh, geez, now I've ruined it all. Cardinal Radcliffe petitioned the Pope to not be ordained a bishop. Again, the guy wearing the white habit there. And Pope Francis granted him that request. Now, that's happened a few times in the last 50 years, but usually when it happens, it's a cardinal who's over the age of 80 when he's created a cardinal. So in other words, it's kind of an honorary appointment. Now, Radcliffe is 79, and he was just made a cardinal in December, so even as his biographer, I thought that it was sort of probably unlikely that he would participate in a conclave ever. Now he will. So it's very, very unlikely that he or any other non-bishop will be elected as pope. Okay. Canon law says that all cardinals have to be bishops, but the Pope is the final arbiter and supreme judge of the whole law of the church. So he can disregard canon law if he so chooses, which he did by appointing more than 120 cardinals. So that's just a matter of the human law of the church that Pope Francis went in a different direction. Very unlikely that Cardinal Radcliffe will be elected. So it's more than likely. Everybody else in that room, as far as I can tell, is a bishop, except for maybe those two guys in the bottom corner. Anyway, every other guy in that room is a bishop, so he wouldn't, if they're elected, wouldn't need to be ordained a bishop in the Sistine Chapel.
Thank you.
Does it make sense?
Perfect.
Great. Yeah.
So I don't know where I found this, but I heard from someone that we've had like a Polish Pope and then
John Paul II.
Argentinian now.
Yeah.
And the kind of sentiment is they want to go back to an Italian and kind of a return to a modern tradition, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Do you kind of see that sentiment? I know you said I forget his name, but one of the Italian cardinals has a good shot.
Yeah, the two of them that I mentioned are Italian. So here is Zuppi. He would not be moderate. He would be Italian, yes. Moderate, no. I mean, he's an interesting guy. Parolin, I do think is more moderate. If they're looking for a very organized person, very sort of down the center, maybe even boring, might be. And that I don't mean that in a pejorative sense against Parolin, but I mean it in the sense of sort of some cardinals might want a little bit more status quo. He's your guy. But the thing about it is, we don't know until the conclave ends, because, in 2013, remember I said that Angelo Scola was the runner-up in 2013? He was the big-time favorite. All the odds makers had him listed as number one. He was such a favorite that when the white smoke came up, the Italian Bishops' Conference put out a tweet congratulating him before they even had any sort of information. So I was like, how did they know this? They didn't. It was, a bunch of, baloney. So that said something about the mind of the cardinals. I don't know. It's possible. You're possibly right that this is something that they're looking for, and we're just not going to know until the name is mentioned on the balcony there. It's really just a mystery until then. But certainly we can have another one of these events in a month's time, and we can sort of do most of the students here will be gone, but we can save it till the fall as well. But we can do sort of a post-op analysis of the conclave and what the cardinals were looking for. But for now, I tried to give a few different possibilities. People with more pastoral experience, people with more diplomatic experience, people on the left, people on the right, people in the middle, young people. I didn't give you too many older names here, even though I think it's going to be somebody older. Looking at that list, it's hard to say who. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Meg and then Joe.
Are any of them Jesuits? Are any of those front runners Jesuits?
Nope. In fact, I'm trying to think if any of them are members of religion. He's a member of a religious order. I'm just not remembering which one. Prevost is an Augustinian. Tobin's a Redemptorist. And I'm not sure about Tempesta. I know he is, though. I'm forgetting which order he's from. So the Jesuits in the conclave are going to be Cardinal Michael Czerny, who's a remarkable man, Cardinal Hollerich from Luxembourg. Czerny's from Canada, but he works in the Curia. Cardinal Rossi from Argentina, a good friend of Pope Francis's, and Cardinal Stephen Chow. Oh, fascinating man. He just ordained my college roommate to the priesthood last June. And Cardinal Chow, in his homily at the Chrism Mass in Hong Kong, he's the Bishop of Hong Kong, in his homily at last year's Chrism Mass, he got up and said, and the Chrism Mass is the Mass that takes place during Holy Week every year in each diocese around the world, mainly meant for the priests of the diocese, where they renew their vows, they renew their promises to the bishop. He started off his homily by looking out at the priests in the front of the church, Cardinal Chow, and he said, "Dear brothers in the presbyterate, and hopefully one day sisters too." Not going to find too many cardinals who are on the record as saying that. Note that I did not list him as a popular. I don't think he stands a chance, but I know I have a certain sense that he's not going to vote for Cardinal Erdo, for example. Joe.
Yeah. So you do such a terrific job describing that liberal and conservative don't really work in terms of what's internal of the church. But the church, of course, is in a larger local context. And of course, someone like J.D. Vance met with Francis days before Francis's death. So there is a kind of larger political weather within which they're making these decisions. And I'm curious to what extent you think that's something that might be on the minds of the cardinals as they're voting, because endorsing certain kinds of papabile would suggest support for more conservative governments and a sort of anti-democratic movement. And I think Francis in many ways has been allied with an opposition to that. So I'm just curious if you think that that is something that would play out, and how might that express itself?
Definitely. So like Erdo here, remember I mentioned him as a conservative? He's a personal friend of Viktor Orban's. I mean,
Yes.
so, I mean, there you have it. So think back, if you could, to like early February when J.D. Vance, the vice president, was making the rounds on the Sunday talk shows, and on the CBS show, he started talking about a Catholic term. J.D. Vance is a recent Catholic convert in the last 5 years or so. J.D. Vance talked about a Catholic term called the Ordo Amoris, the ordering of love. And he basically, in his explanation, he basically said, first you love your family, then you love your neighbor, then you love, people in your country, and then, if there's any room left, I'm paraphrasing now, you love other people. Well, Pope Francis on February 14th, Pope Francis went into the hospital. On February 10th, Pope Francis wrote a letter to the U.S. bishops, basically, without naming J.D. Vance, excoriating that type of language. And in fact, he said, the Ordo Amoris is not, and I don't know if I have the document here, it's worth reading verbatim, but he said the Ordo Amoris is not something that St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas meant to exclude people. The Ordo Amoris is how can you include more and more and more people in the Christian vocation of love. And I would have to go back and check, but I don't think Pope Francis ever before in his 12-year pontificate ever cited the Ordo Amoris. So it was clear to whom he was referring. Also clear because he wrote the letter to the U.S. bishops. In 1963, Pope John XXIII wrote an encyclical called Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth. And, the Cuban Missile Crisis had just happened, and this was clearly in response to that, and he died 8 weeks later. And his biographer, Peter Hebblethwaite, called that his last will and testament. I believe that Pope Francis's letter to the U.S. bishops, which was written 8 weeks before his death, was his last will and testament. Whoever walks out on that loggia is going to be in direct response to that last will and testament. If it's Peter Erdo, I don't think it will be. I want to make that clear again for the camera. I don't think it will be him. But if it's him, that was the cardinal saying, put that last will and testament right through the shredder. But if it's somebody like, even if it's somebody like Paroline, then it's like, okay, then we're taking this seriously. He may not have the flash that Pope Francis had. He may not have that personal touch to the individual people, because he's more of a diplomat. He's more, I guess, removed than that. But he certainly would be of that similar mindset as Francis in that document. Is that helpful?
Yeah, but the question is, you do believe they will be conscious of that?
Oh, yeah.
The Pope that they select will in some ways be not liberal conservative within the church, but in the larger international sphere, will be saying, this is where we want to put our influence.
Absolutely.
In this cultural normative division.
If they don't, they're naive, and I don't think they are. It's no, I should say some cardinals I do think are naive. There is a cardinal who just left, Cardinal David from the Philippines, who just left the Philippines, and he was being interviewed by the local media, and he said, oh, there are no candidates in this. This is a spiritual process. Well, it is a spiritual process, but this is a political election. There are absolutely candidates. So I think he's going to be disabused of that notion pretty quickly when he gets to Rome today and next week when cardinals are politicking, including, by the way, cardinals over the age of 80. Because even though they're not going to necessarily be candidates for the position, they're going to be kingmakers. So, for example, in 2013, we know this from, as I said, the secrets of these conclaves never last for long. So this book was published within the year. This is called The Election of Pope Francis, an inside account of the conclave that changed history, by Jerry O'Connell, the Vatican reporter for America Magazine. And Jerry has a point-by-point, ballot-by-ballot breakdown of the conclave. But what he said was, before they went into the conclave, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, at that time, he's now dead, but at that time, the retired Archbishop of Westminster in England, was a big Francis fan. and wanted to see Francis elected. So he would have cardinals over his apartment in Rome and really push Francis's name. Then Francis gave a remarkable address to the general congregation. And in those times, it should have become evident to any cardinal who didn't think they were in a political process that this is a political process. So they have to know that that whoever they choose is going to be a political statement. If they don't, they're naive. And as I said, I think that any cardinal going in thinking this is just a spiritual retreat is going to be disabused of the notion pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Patty. Oh, I'll get Amy first, then back to Patty.
Kind of along a similar trajectory, do you think that the Cardinals' feelings and opinions toward the model of synodality that Francis introduced is going to impact this selection?
Absolutely. So Amy raised the term synodality, and this has been a major facet of Pope Francis's pontificate since he took office in 2013. He's had a number of synods. So the synod is something that was sort of restored by the Second Vatican Council as had meant to be a meeting for bishops. But in the last 3 years, Pope Francis has expanded that synod to mean that everybody has a chance to be listened to in the church. So I absolutely think it's going to be a referendum on his message of synodality. That we'll know, again, immediately as soon as we hear the name, if it was somebody who was in support of the synod or opposed to this message of synodality. Why would anybody be opposed to this? Well, clericalism or hierarchicalism for that matter. In other words, there's a lot of cardinals, maybe not a lot, but a few dozen cardinals in the conclave who think that the synod ought to be reserved only for bishops in the church. And there are other people in the conclave who believe that synodality means and should mean that it's open to everyone, that everyone gets a voice. So these last two synods, last October and the October before that, there were women in the room. I mean, that had never taken place in the synod hall before, and also laymen for that matter, as well as priests. You know, there had never been examples of even priests being in the synod hall. So we're going to know almost immediately, I think. Again, as soon as the name is mentioned, we'll know this is somebody who supported that line of thinking, or this is somebody who didn't. But already there are some cardinals. I mentioned a few minutes ago in response to Meg's question about the Jesuits. One of the Jesuits, the cardinal from Luxembourg, Cardinal Hallrich, who was very influential in the synod, he said in the media the other day that we can't go back on Pope Francis's reforms. Now that's not true, because the next pope can do whatever he wishes, but I mean, that's a statement that he will say from that floor in the general congregation, and a number of other people will say as well. But we're not going to know for sure until we hear the name. Patty?
So,
Yeah, go ahead, Patty, and then Ben.
the question on like the secrecy, you said during the general congregation, there are no like press allowed in, or there are?
Right, no, there are not.
No press, and definitely not into the conclave. But you said during the conclave, there's not, like, is it silence? Is it a silent vote? Is it
During the
discussion?
conclave?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Silence.
the only time that speaking happens is when each cardinal goes up, holds their ballot up, and says aloud, "This is the man before God who I think is best suited to be pope," and puts the vote in. And then after all those people have voted, the cardinal scrutineers call out the names.
Okay.
Those are the only words spoken once the conclave
And then I
begins.
have a related question. It's probably secret and we wouldn't know, or maybe we do, you would know. Has there anyone like refused, like been voted, and then you said like they have to accept, and has they not accepted?
That I'm not sure of, but I do know for sure that certain countries, the monarchs of certain countries, used to have veto power over the decision of the conclave. So when you know, I don't even think it's that long ago. Like, I want to say it was like late 19th century that a candidate was put forth, and he was vetoed by an emperor in Europe. I'd have to go back, or a king in Europe. I'd have to go. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit fuzzy on that detail.
No, you're not fuzzy.
But it used to be that certain people had veto power over this, and so that would be a lot more likely than somebody turning it down. Again, because you can see the sort of the groundswell.
You can see it coming.
Like-
I just would feel like it's such this enormous responsibility. It might. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Yep. Ben, did you have something?
Yes. So, are there term limits for popes? And if not, has there ever been conversations about it?
Great question. No, there are not, and here's the reason. The reason is the Pope is basically the last absolute monarch in the world. So the Pope does not answer to any human authority. So if one Pope said, okay, there's going to be a 10-year term limit, the next Pope could come in and said, absolutely not. No term limit. Nobody's going to tell me when to step down. I'm the Pope. So that's why there are no term limits. I definitely think it's been talked about, Ben, and I think even more than term limits, the question is raised as to what happens if a pope is incapacitated. So we know that in Francis's last hours, he slipped into a coma. Now, thankfully, that was a very quick and peaceful passing, according to Vatican News report. But what if he had slipped into a coma for a week or a month or a year? There's no provision to remove him from office. Who can do it? Term limits is an interesting question, but to me, the more interesting one is what happens to an incapacitated pope, and there's no actual answer to that. Anyone else? Thanks so much for coming, everybody.